would be on the consent agenda then?
Correct.
Okay. And then item 5, I would like to pull off there. I just had a couple of questions on that one.
Okay. All right. So the consent agenda would be item 4 and 6. And as Alder Foster pointed out, item 6, we're just the public information, the public feedback hasn't been obtained yet. So we've been asked to push it out to our next meeting. So the consent agenda is just to re-refer it to the August 26th meeting. Is there any further discussion about the consent agenda? Okay, if not, is there any objection to a unanimous consent vote? If you prefer a roll call vote, please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so we'll assume a unanimous vote. Okay, we'll move on to item 2. Jody Dobson from Baker Tilly is here today to talk about the Metro Transit Annual Financial Statement Audit Report. So Jody, go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me with you tonight. So we were able to complete the transit audit this spring. We actually typically do our field work in April. So this year, due to the current COVID-19 situation, we adjusted our audit process and were able to complete the audit remotely. And so I guess I first want to thank staff for all their work. I know it's much easier when they can just hand us documents as we're sitting in the table within their office, but they really worked hard to get us everything we needed to complete this process as we were working both them remote and us remote and moving data back and forth through cyberspace. So really appreciated that. I believe you have a short handout in your packets that I typically walk through here. And so I'm just going to go over these key highlights. The first page is the audit results, which is what everyone wants to know is how did we end up at the end of this process? The financial statements received what we call an unmodified or a clean opinion. So this is the highest level of assurance that we can give on the financial statements. And it basically tells you or any outside readers that the financial statements are a fair presentation in all material respects of the position and the results of operations for the organization. The financial statements are management's responsibility. And in your case, your accounting team pulls together the financial statement document. So they're gathering all the information from the records and putting it into the schedules and the footnotes with all the detail that you see there. And then our duty is to design our audit test such that we can issue that opinion on that information. But one thing I always like to point out is towards the beginning of the document, I think it's pages 4 through 20, there's a section called Management Discussion and Analysis. And this is something that GASB suggests and management puts together to really provide highlights of what happened during the year and the impacts it had on the finances of the organization. It's a little bit of an easier read than some of the technical accounting information that's later on in the report. So I always like to point that out if you've got a constituent who is interested, but maybe doesn't want to get into the weeds. That's a nice area for them. So in addition to the financial statements, there's 2 other areas that we look at as part of the annual audit process. The first is the federal and state grant funds that are received by Metro. Because of the amount of funding that you receive, you and the city overall are required to have what we call a single audit. So what that process is really is we're focusing in on certain grant programs and not only the dollars, but the compliance areas that are required by those grant agreements as set forth by the federal agencies, and then the controls over those areas of compliance. So I'm happy to report that for 2019, there were no findings noted as part of this process for any of Metro's grants. And then the third area that we look at is the NTD, or National Transit Database Report. This is something that, again, management pulls together. It has both financial and statistical information in it. And due to the size of your organization, the federal agency has a requirement that the auditor does some certain tests on that, what we call agreed upon procedures. So go through and trace some of the information back to support. We are in the final processes of that right now, going through the last steps, and I can say there's no significant issues noted. It's going very smoothly. So then within the handout, you go down a page or two, depending upon where the page break fell. We've got a couple graphs here, just looking at the operations of the organization trending over the last 5 years. So what we can see is 2019 total revenues very comparable to 2018, not only in the total amount, but in the breakout or the sources of revenues. So about 26% from passenger fare and other operating revenues, 31% from the city and other local subsidies. You have several local partners that you work with to fund service. And then about 31% from the state aid or grants, and 11% from the federal aids. So that's, when you look over the last 5 years, relatively consistent mix of revenue sources. And then looking at the operating expenses, there was a slight increase from 2018 to 2019 in expenses. I think the largest item that I recall in that area was items related to pension and other post-employment costs, which are not always out-of-pocket costs, but they are accruals that are required to be made under the accounting standards. But as we look at the mix of expenses here, again, about 77% was labor-related costs, salaries and benefits. Very consistent over the last 5 years, and I will also say consistent with all of the transit organizations that I work with. That is the largest driver in the operating costs. That's followed by contract services, materials and supplies, and then interagency charges and interest makes up less than 3% in total of the operating expenses. So at the bottom of the page here, we point out for the last 2 years what the revenues and expenses were. And as we can see here, the revenues were very consistent, and that increase in the expenses by roughly $2 million, the bulk of that was driven by, as I said, the pension and OPEB expenses, which are calculated through actuarial reports and are not directly driven as a cash outlay, but rather an accrual that's required in the financial statements under the governmental accounting standards. So then our last page here, just a couple things that I'm required by the AICPA as the auditor to communicate to you. As I mentioned previously, the financial statements are management's responsibility, and our responsibility is to be able to issue our audit opinion. So we have to design our audit tests in order to issue that opinion. What we do to start that process is understand your accounting team's processes and controls that they have in place. So we're not giving an opinion on those internal controls, but we do understand them enough to design where do we want to focus our testing and what type of test do we want to do. As such, if there were any areas of internal control that came to our attention that we felt were a significant deficiency or a material weakness, an area where there could be a material misstatement to the financial statements because of a lack of control, we'd have to report that to you. And I'm happy to say I have none of those to report. As far as new accounting standards, GASB keeps us all very busy. So 2 years ago, we implemented GASB statement number 75 related to other post-employment benefits. In 2019, the only new accounting standard to be implemented was GASB 88, which related to some additional disclosures around debt issues, just some additional footnote information. And I'm happy to report that for 2020, we're not anticipating any new standards to be applicable. As a result of the COVID-19 situation, GASB has actually deferred the implementation dates on several of their new standards to allow governments time to focus on the current situation before having to implement those standards. All financial statements do include estimates. And so we note here a couple of the key estimates that are involved in yours are, as I said, the pension and OPEB liabilities and related deferrals, which are calculated by actuaries, and then also the accrued sick leave, which is based on policy. And in all those cases, we evaluate the methods and key assumptions that are utilized to ensure that they're consistent in compliance with standards. The other things, you know, if we had any disagreements with management, any concerns about policies or any specific transactions, we would report those to you. So this is where I can say no news is good news for the rest of my report.
Good. Does anybody have any questions for Jody? Or do you have anything else, Jody, that you think it's important for us to hear, or advice that going forward? Although I would just point out one thing. In your audited financial statements, you always need to talk about anything that's happened subsequent to the audit that might have a large impact. And I noticed you had a footnote about COVID. And obviously, we've all heard this from Metro and from parking and from everybody in the city. So that's just something we'll have to watch for next year, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're anticipating that, you know, as I think you all are, that there will be impacts for 2020 and maybe 2021. And it's not that we know exactly what those are right now, but just letting the reader know that there are likely to be impacts and that they are being monitored.
Yeah. Are there any other comments or questions for Jody? If not, could I have a motion to accept the report, please?
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Bill, I see your hand up. Bill, was that a second with your hand?
That is a second.
Okay, thank you. So we had a motion, and I think I heard Bridget, I heard a second motion, or second. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody would prefer that we take a roll call vote for this item. Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Jody. We appreciate all the work that you do with Metro, and it's very important, obviously, for a lot of reasons, and we always look forward to hearing from you every year.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3. Is it Jeffrey Geiger and Tom Otto? Presentation on redevelopment RFP for the State Street campus parking ramp on Lake Street. And I see Sabrina is on as well. So go ahead and unmute yourselves, and we'll follow on our normal course where we'll ask you to do a brief presentation. You can assume that everybody has read the material, but we normally ask staff to make a brief presentation, and then we'll move on to discussion.
Great. Would I be able to share my screen if that's okay with everyone?
Sure.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Jeff Greger. I'm a planner in the planning division. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Tom Otto from economic development. The two of us, along with other city staff, have been working on drafting an RFP for the replacement of the State Street parking ramp along Lake Street. This RFP would not include the Francis Street garage. So we wanted to come before this body and give an informational presentation to let you know this is an upcoming project, as well as to give you an opportunity to give us your feedback on the draft RFP prior to issuing that RFP. So the State Street parking ramp on Lake Street is the next parking structure in the parking utility schedule for replacement due to age and its condition. The redevelopment RFP, there's a number of things that are in that RFP. One would be a new parking structure to replace the State Street ramp. And currently, the way it's written, it would be to replace the current number of stalls with the same number of stalls, so there wouldn't be an increase or a decrease in stalls. The Francis Street and Lake Street structures would still be connected. The other portion of this project would include an intercity bus terminal. Currently, that terminal is located on public streets, and it tends year to year to move around the city. This would be a permanent structure within the developments. It would be fairly minimal. There would be an indoor seating area, heated and cooled, no restrooms or any sort of thing like that. So minimal upkeep. And then there would be room outdoors for a number of coach buses to park and pick up riders. The RFP would also call for some first floor retail and then some housing above. Wanted to also, so that's the basically the meat of the RFP. We're looking to make introduction to council for authorization to release the RFP September 1st. However, that date's in flux a little bit. It may be pushed to the September 15th meeting. Ideally, council would authorize us to proceed with releasing that RFP in early October. And then we would have about a roughly 3-month period of open period for the RFP. And proposers would get us their proposals back in early January. We'd spend a few months selecting a preferred developer. And then hopefully by summer of 2021, council would make or approve a development agreement. And then we would look for groundbreaking sometime first or second quarter of 2022. We are aware that there is a question about funding at this point, but we've been given direction by the mayor to continue to proceed with this RFP with the hopes that as we get closer to the actual construction of this project, that the budget picture would be a little bit clearer due to COVID, obviously. So that's why we're continuing to proceed, but we do acknowledge right now there is a question regarding the funding of the construction of the public portion of this. We are looking at TIF funding to be part of that mix. So again, we wanted to bring that to this body's attention and hopefully get some feedback from this body on the draft RFP so that when we move forward, we have all the information necessary to put out a quality RFP. So with that, Tom and I are available to answer questions from the group.
Who has questions? I have some comments, but I'll save mine till the end. Alder Foster, go ahead, Grant.
Thank you.
And then Bill, you'll be next.
So in section 3 under the project requirements, number 3 says the city will construct, own, and operate the automobile parking. Is the inner city bus component also expected to be city owned and operated and constructed?
Yes.
Okay. And maybe I'm just missing that, but it just seemed like it was just the automobile parking that was called out there, so that might be worth just clarifying. And then probably the bicycle component as well would also be city built and maintained, I would expect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll clarify that. Thank you.
Yep. And then my only other comment, I mentioned this in our just a discussion item we had previously, and it may not be relevant for the RFP specifically, but I noticed that one of the goals or two of the goals relate to biking and walking, enhancing Lake Street as an important connection and the intermodal connectivity. I think similar to the Judge Doyle project and the bike center there, they're probably is an opportunity to do something with this project as well, beyond just parking stalls for bicycles. And one of the things that comes to mind for me, it would be to engage the UW and see if there's any interest on their end. I know they have a kind of small bicycle center in the Helen C. White parking facility right now. That's part of the kind of UW transportation services. And so I would expect there'll be a lot of conversations with UW on this project, but I think there might be some opportunities for some synergies there to really strengthen that kind of bike connection component with this project as well.
Great, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Bill, go ahead.
It caught my attention when you were speaking of some of the criteria for the Intercity Bus Terminal that there would not be restrooms. And you put that out kind of like strongly, I guess. And I wonder if is that how does that conclusion reached? I mean, I suspect when we go out for comments and so forth, there's going to be input from not only the public, but other people and other businesses that are going to be around this, that if people need restrooms, they're going to look for them, and that's going to be a challenge. So I guess I know putting restrooms in a facility like this is going to be would be a challenge, but I'm concerned about not having restrooms available. You know, that it seems to me it should be discussed and put out to the public for input.
Yeah, we'll definitely take that comment back and take a look at it. I think the way it's been talked about thus far is it's to help cut down on maintenance costs. If we don't have bathrooms to clean, then it's, you know, it saves money that way. But we'll definitely take your comments under consideration and reevaluate that.
Is that all you had, Bill?
That's fine. Thank you.
Ken, you're next.
Under number 7C, the last sentence of the that paragraph, it says, the city shall not consider TIF assistance to assist student housing. How would there be a differentiation in the developer's proposal for what is student housing and what isn't student housing?
Tom, do you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, what page is that on?
Well, under section 3, number 7C, you have a couple of paragraphs. I'm looking at the last sentence of the first paragraph, and it talks about the TIF policy, and it says you won't use TIF for student housing. Yeah. And I'm just asking, how do you differentiate? How would the developers say these units are for students and these units aren't?
Yeah, I mean, all I can tell you is that the TIF, we're working with the TIF team, and student housing is not an eligible TIF cost. So how that would be sort of worked through is something we'd have to figure out. But student housing is not a TIF eligible cost, basically. So we're just trying to state that clearly.
Sort of, you know, when you see it, what the designs of the housing units would look like. Some would be more attractive for student short term, and some would be more attractive for epic longer term people, or what?
Well,
that's a tough call, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about apartments that are located next to campus, so.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's something we're working through. I don't really have an answer for you right now, but I mean, there is student housing is housing that's designated for students. So, that would be a different animal than something that would be considered an affordable housing unit. So
I guess I'd be suggesting then that when you roll out your RFP, you ask the responders to specifically identify how they would make sure that TIF wasn't going to be used for student housing. Because it just seems sort of nebulous. Anybody who shows up with a deposit for a lease,
right?
They don't have to check a box to say, am I a student or not?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Is that all you had, Ken?
Yes.
Okay. Harold, you're next.
Thank you. So yeah, I want to echo what Bill has been pointing out about the facilities at the Intercity Bus Terminal. You know, I read the document and I read Intercity Bus Terminal. I was like, that sounds great, but it sounds basically all it's going to be is a waiting room, and that's basically it, which I think is probably not what people have been hoping for. I mean, when previously, as you said, the bus terminal has been moved around from various locations, and this Lake Street proposal was always like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to move things around and it's not going to be ideal. But once we get to the Lake Street facility, it's going to be a great facility. And to me, it doesn't sound like a great facility. I'm also wondering, have you gotten any feedback from the bus companies in terms of the operations? Because so it sounded like the buses are going to stop on Lake Street, and then I guess they are going to, like, you know, how is it going to work operationally if all you have is buses stopping on the street? How does the street width work with that? How does the sidewalk width work with that? I mean, one facility that makes a bus terminal good is that you have a roof, like if it's raining and you exit the waiting area and you get onto the bus, not being exposed to the weather. So I think I'm overall pretty disappointed from what it looks like the Intercity Bus Terminal portion of this project is going to be.
So thus far, we have not had discussions with the bus providers. However, the idea is the Intercity Terminal would be an off-street facility. It would be up to the developer to propose something to the city. Then they'd need to work with the city on the exact design. But the idea is the buses would pull off of Lake Street into the property, whether it's into the ramp or adjacent to the ramp. Wherever this waiting room / terminal is, that would be covered. And then the buses would pull through to either the alley or the next street over and exit. So it would be off street. And there could be an opportunity for a roof so that when it is raining, people wouldn't get wet. But, you know, that would be the first part of it. Would the developer would make a proposal to the city and work with the city on the actual design.
So Harold, in order to incorporate Harold's comments, perhaps when you talk about your preliminary project concepts, you could add, ask that they show how the buses would move through the facility, the turning requirements, a lot of the things that you've been talking about. So Harold, it would be clear when proposals came back exactly how they would address the concerns that you had.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was good to hear that clarification, but that doesn't seem to be written into the document right now. So
correct.
It's kind of unclear.
Did you have anything else, Harold?
Nope.
Okay, then Grant, you're next.
Thanks. I also just wanted to chime in again to reinforce what Bill was saying and what Harold pointed out. And honestly, I think it might be worth making some edits to this before and bringing it back again, because I mean, thinking about the discussions that we had and the amount of public feedback we had just for the temporary move from the union, and like getting a place where people could get to a bathroom was probably, I mean, one of the biggest considerations for sure. So the like to be describing a intercity bus terminal, but then now understanding that like wouldn't be much of anything at all. I think there's a really big disconnect there. So I guess I would be worried putting it out there without some more definition that the RFPs are not going to also understand what it is we're really looking for. So I think it really feels like we need a little bit more work around defining what is the scope of this bus component, because, you know, I just would never, if you said an intercity bus terminal, I would never imagine a facility that didn't have a restroom. It just, that kind of seems like that's almost what could make a terminal, is roof over your head and somewhere to go to the bathroom. I mean, those kind of seem like minimum components. So yeah, I think perhaps just going back and doing a little bit more discussions and details around what we're looking for in that bus component would be worthwhile.
Okay.
So Grant, I heard your suggestion that they bring it back. Are you suggesting that they work on it and bring it back to the Transportation Commission before it goes to the council?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think the intercity, this was also, I think, in the Imagine Madison plan, in the transportation section, one of the key elements that came out of the focus group works, which were where we got feedback, especially from some of the folks that don't often get a voice into our planning process. The importance of intercity bus travel was one of the things that they highlighted. And so I'm pretty sure that made it into the final draft of our comp plan as well. So, and as Harold has said, we've whenever we've had conversations about it, it's, well, just wait for this Lake Street project, because that's where we're going to do the thing. And so if we are going to do something much less than that, we need to be really explicit about it and explain why it's so pared back. And if not, hopefully we can get it back up to a level that's, I think, a little bit more representative of what a lot of people have been hoping and waiting for. So yeah, I think bringing it back here would be helpful.
And we do have a meeting on August 26th, so that would perhaps still work within your timeline?
It would work with the September 15th introduction, yes. The September 1st, it would not. We have to get it on Legistar by noon on the 26th.
Okay.
So, but I think we're headed towards probably more likely a September 15th introduction.
Okay.
So that would potentially work.
Okay.
And just to point out too, that we're assuming this commission will be on the referrals for the RFP. So we'll be back multiple times.
Okay.
So if we come back on the 26th, we'll be back also as part of the authorization. So.
Okay. All right. Chris, you're next.
Thanks. It was helpful to hear sort of the vision for what would be included in this. But in listening to it, I'm wondering now, with the off-street intermodal facilities, the preserving the number of parking and the retail on the first floor and all of those sort of constraints, has a general concept been sketched out to at least make sure that that this is a doable project that people will respond to, meeting all those expectations?
Not to my knowledge. Tom and I have not been part. If it has, it's been done outside of our involvement in this project. Sabrina maybe has some thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just respond to that quickly. We do have a concept design that was drawn up that showed first floor with the bus terminal with parking and turning. So we do have some conceptual designs already in place. One of the things I think that there's some different options we'd like to explore. One could be loading, or could Hawthorne Court, potentially be used as well for buses waiting. So I think we do have some ideas on concept designs. That's where we're looking for different ideas from proposals on what that might look like. So it ultimately depends on various proposals and what the retail space as well would look like for that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Ken, you're up.
I'm thinking that we need to be clear on what we're thinking about as far as intercity. So I'm old enough to remember the Badger Bus Depot, where before it was even on West Washington, where it used to be where the federal courthouse is now, and Greyhound. And those were the days where you did transfers. As near as I can tell, the mode for the only really significant intercity provider, which is Greyhound, is to keep their terminals out by the interstate because they can't afford to come into the city that would take them 25 minutes and to go back out to the there. So when we're talking about the issue for bathrooms and waiting, it's a lot different when we're talking about Van Galder or Badger, where people tend to time their getting there to be about 5 minutes before the bus arrives or leaves, and then they just get off the bus and go. So I think maybe whether, I don't know who would do that with as city staff, but we really need to sort of say, where are the transfer kind of places going to be? Because when I read this, I didn't even think about it being a place that people would be waiting in between two different buses, that it would simply provide some shelter for the rain, you know, if they got there 15 minutes early, as opposed to when I used to take buses where you'd have to sit in the Greyhound station in Chicago for 2 hours waiting for your connection.
I think that's where the bare bones terminal idea is coming from. My understanding from the staff I've spoken to is it's for the providers who are using the street right now. So that'd be Badger Bus, Van Galder, and that would be the people that buy their tickets online and show up 5 minutes before their bus arrives and they go. I'm not sure that Greyhound necessarily would be using this. So that may be the nexus of why the bare bones terminal was proposed in the RFP.
Harold, go ahead.
I mean, just quickly in response to that, I mean, one significant issue where the bathroom and the waiting areas come into play is when you have to deal with delays, which is pretty common and which is more common during the winter when it's even worse waiting outside. So, I mean, from my experience taking the bus, they're not always on time, and that's when you end up being there for half an hour or something. But I think your point is well taken. The transfers mostly do not happen there.
Mm-hmm. The only way I can think of a transfer is if somebody's taking a metro bus to catch the intercity bus, then they may be doing that kind of transfer. But otherwise, other comments? I have a few, but again, I'm going to wait till everybody else has had their shot. A lot of there are several things that that have already been mentioned that I won't spend time talking again about. But one observation that I would make is that the requirements section doesn't include some things that are in the project goals, but you don't specifically see that I can tell that there should be first floor retail, that there should be housing above. You know, it just talks about the project as, sorry, let me get to the retail. It talks about the project must be a high quality mixed use project that is compatible with surrounding buildings and uses. And if we're expecting that there be retail on the first floor, and if we are expecting that there be housing above, shouldn't we put that into the requirements section? So I think that it's important that you go back and look at what's in the goals and what's in the requirements, and make sure that you have everything in the requirements that you actually expect to see. And does it make any difference in terms of the references that you're looking at? Do you want to have specifically references from some municipalities that they've worked with to see if they have had a successful private-public partnership in the past? Because that may be different than if they've just done private development work and not had any kind of private-public partnership. So just something to consider. And I think most of the other things have been covered already. Does anybody have any other thoughts? It sounds like we're leaning toward having this come back to us again on August 26th so that we can see how many of these comments that we've been talking about have been fleshed out before it goes to the council. Is that what I'm hearing? Grant, I think that was your thought. Everybody in agreement on that? This is just here for our feedback, but it sounds like we'd like to see some of these things more fleshed out. That's our suggestion. Tom and Jeffrey, any issues with that from a timing standpoint?
No, I think we should be able to accommodate that. So we will see you again on the 26th.
Okay, we'll put that on our tentative agenda for the 26th. Any last comments before we let them go? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll skip down to item 5. Is Jim Wolf here? Are you?
Why don't we do 4 and 6?
I beg your pardon?
Why don't we just do the 4 and 6 right now?
We did those already, Ken. Those were on the consent agenda.
Right. Okay.
That's okay. So 4 and 6 have already been approved. 5 was separated out from the consent agenda. So I don't know if we need a presentation, or Grant, you said you just had a couple of questions. Should we move right to questions?
Yeah, that would be great. Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
And I don't know, I'm assuming Jim, I saw him on the list before. I think he's here.
Yeah, he's right here.
I can
Yep.
share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. That's usually helpful for everybody's looking at the same thing.
Does that one work okay?
Yeah, fine.
Perfect.
That's probably the most up-to-date thing that we have too, so.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just a few questions. One was around the Machinery Row corner. Yep. So, and I brought this up last time, and it's hard for me to tell with the scale, but it's one of the kind of busier queuing locations for people on bike and walkers and joggers, et cetera. Is the amount of space that we're providing off the path there, do you have any estimates as to how many people will be able to queue in there?
I don't have an estimate on the number of people, but the ramp length here, I think, is about 12 feet or so, 12, 13 feet. So it's considerably more than what's there right now, and I think it would be 16 feet wide. We could also maybe add a little bit of additional concrete sidewalk around there or something like that too, to have some more available staging area.
Okay, yeah, I would say maybe give that one more look, and if you can, I don't think it would hurt to have a little bit extra space there, just especially around the corner. I know there's just a lot of times we're going through and people are waiting and kind of in the middle of the path, so I think that'd be great there.
Sure.
The sidewalk that's shown on, looks like it's got a lot of sticky notes on top.
Yeah, we just got all your notes. There you go.
I wanted to make a note of that so I didn't forget.
Good job.
See, you guys see I'm doing it.
You're not just nodding. On the kind of north, or the west, maybe it's even the southwest corner.
By the gardens?
And then south of the railroad tracks there, is that
Oh, yes.
That's going there? Is that like going to be a bus stop, or what is that kind of pull-out area and sidewalk looking thing?
So the previous plan didn't have this, but I had mentioned it in the presentation. This would be a bus pull-out area. So the southbound travel lane on Blair Street would continue on John Nolan, and buses could pull out here. There'd be a boarding area and then a sidewalk connection up here. I think ultimately, what's been passed on to me from Metro anyways, they would prefer to serve this area with stops around the general intersection. When we had reconstructed Williamson Street, we had set up a bus boarding pad on Williamson Street last year. And I think they wanted to try to consolidate some of the stops around this area. So this would be a pull-out area with a sidewalk connection connecting back to the intersection.
Okay. And then is there a corresponding eastbound stop for that location then? Where would that be planned for?
So the eastbound stop, I think, is right around the bike rack and this new ped light in front of Machinery Row.
Okay.
Westbound would be in the parking / loading / bus lane here. And then I don't think there's a northbound one around the intersection.
So just be a southbound stop then for that new one?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, right now the nearest Franklin or the nearest stop here is back at the intersection with Franklin. Kind of heading east. And I'm not sure if a route currently heads south on John Nolan, but that's the plan ultimately.
Okay. And then, yeah, up in front of the like Essen House area there, can you just kind of explain the different lines, like what we're seeing there, what sidewalk and what other stuff is?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of the bolder looking lines are the curb lines here, extending through. You're seeing this is actually like a pavement saw cut line, so that's more of a construction line than an actual pavement marking line. But then there'd be a 10-foot parking bus stop loading lane, the buffered bike lane. We have sidewalk kind of continuing through the intersection with the ramps, continuing back up to the corner by the Hotel Ruby Marie. And then right now the existing sidewalk is about 6 feet or so right up against the face of the buildings. And based on the input that we received from SHPO, from the State Historic Preservation Office, since we are removing kind of this historic travel lane here and the pavement in this area, their request was to make sure that we're having as much pavement as is there right now. So this is more like a concrete terrace area. So we'd still have the existing trees and tree grades. We could look at putting some additional bike parking over in this area if necessary. But this was additional sidewalk width to kind of satisfy the historic requirements there.
Okay, but no motor vehicle access through there following the project?
Nope. We would build full curb head through here, and any right turns would have to come up to the intersection and make the turn here.
And maybe location for outdoor tables or something for those businesses along there potentially. And
yeah, yep. There, and then we'll have just kind of grass in this area for now. So this could be future use of some kind, maybe bioretention if we wanted to use it for stormwater treatment or something like that. But for the purposes of this project, it would just be grass.
Great. And then my last question is for the kind of further south there, the termination of the kind of cycle track there. Yeah. Can you remind us what the like longer term design concept is, and then just walk through what the thinking is for this kind of interim termination there?
Certainly. I'll maybe try to quick sketch something. So long term, I think our plan is to actually pull the sidewalk back a little bit here. So we would then have enough space to have kind of a separate concrete sidewalk, and then with maybe a narrow buffer, and then a asphalt two-way cycle track. And we would bump the curb out at Franklin and eliminate the on-street bike lane coming in here. So the two-way cycle track that's part of the Wilson Street corridor study would come off-street just prior to the Franklin intersection. And then we'd have 16 feet with a 5-foot concrete sidewalk, 1-foot buffer, 10-foot cycle track that would connect into where we're leaving off now. So the two-way cycle track would be off-street between Franklin and Blair. So this piece of curb right here is mostly sacrificial to kind of tie in the interim. And then the rest of this work, I think we plan to do as part of a reconstruction on East Wilson Street, which I think we currently have scheduled for 2024. So the idea here in the interim would be there's currently a buffered bike lane on eastbound Wilson Street, would be to bring bikes up onto the two-way cycle track here to continue across the intersection. We do have the on-street bike lane on Williamson Street here. So if a cyclist would prefer, they could share this right turn lane, use the bike box here if they wanted to, or they could stay on street, get to the bike box, and stage over to make the left turn onto the Cap City Trail over in this direction. So it's a little awkward, mostly because we need to get the railroad gate placed in the right position with the project now. So maybe ideally we'd prefer to keep a marked bike lane on the street for now, but then the gates wouldn't work in the future.
Sure, that makes sense. Is there, and then the rationale for not making some of those other changes now is just keeping the scope of the project smaller and not wanting to take on any of that extra?
We do have two other people waiting to speak too, Grant, so.
Yes, that's exactly the case. That really the project originally was scoped to be, at least on eastbound Wilson Street, was only going to be the railroad tracks and into the intersection. That's where the 2019 project had left off. So with the corridor study, we felt it was reasonable to do a little bit of additional curb work to set up the intersection for the long-term cycle track option here.
So just, I guess, two thoughts with this piece. So one is the question in my mind of, I expect people will probably start to use it in the inbound direction, and then it'll sort of stop there. Likely folks will probably go on the sidewalk, at least partway, continuing to go inbound. And so I was just wondering if there were a way to get a facility at least up to the street, to the next cross street, to the crosswalk there. And then my other thought was the sort of configuration, if someone is wanting to stay on the street in that sort of bike lane, and then looks like there's a Sharrow in that right turn lane, it looks like a potentially bad kind of merging situation where the right turning motor vehicles are going to be moving into that right turn lane at the same time where somebody would be kind of coming through straight on their bike. So I'm wondering if there's not an opportunity to, with this project, instead of putting the sacrificial curb like you described, if you could keep it where the red line that you drew was, just up to Franklin basically, or right before Franklin. And that way you might be able to both use that stretch as a two-way cycle track up to Franklin to help with the inbound bikes, and then also just have that be a closed curb so you don't have that kind of dangerous mixing between the bikes and the right turning movement. And that way, if somebody is wanting to bike on the street, they would just use the travel lane like everybody else and then slide over at the last minute. So maybe something to think about.
Yeah, we could take a look at that. Part of the issue that we run into with this project is the intersection project is a WISDOT job. And we kind of, with the ultimate design, having to move the sidewalk back out of the right-of-way, we kind of run into a little bit of a scenario with timing of development, because we would have to formally dedicate an easement, even though this is city-owned property, with preparation of some of our plat materials and things that we would have to do with the state project that we wouldn't be able to. Right now, as it's designed, all of the work is within the right-of-way, that we don't have additional acquisition, plat development type formalities that we would have to do. So we could take a look at that.
Yeah, I guess I was talking more about the top red line, so not necessarily doing that shift in the sidewalk itself, but just
just doing the curb.
Yep, just instead of doing the sacrificial curb that you talked about, have that red line that you drew just up to the beginning of Franklin, not even through the, not even that far out, just basically up to where then there'd be a logical place.
Yeah, this is about how far out we have to get the curb in order to make the cycle track work in the future. So to do that, we would, right now there is no on-street bike lane to the west of here. That's only been marked kind of from Franklin to the east. So we probably could do this right now, but we just have to accept that cyclists coming from downtown, kind of down the hill, if they want to stay on the street, they would have to stay in the travel lane more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really small sacrifice because they're going to have to get back into the travel lane and anyway go through it. So yeah, I would really look at that.
Okay, we can take a look at that.
Thank you.
Bridget, you're next.
Chair, we do have a public registrant on 5 that just came in, so I'm not sure what order you want to take that in.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe. Somebody just registered to speak?
Yeah.
Okay. Bridget and Alder Rummel, do you want to hear the registrant before you go?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So why don't we hear from the registrant, and then we'll go to Bridget and Alder Rummel.
Okay. It's Gary Tippler from Jennifer Street in opposition, wishing to speak.
Okay. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I was only peripherally aware of this. I took a look for the drawings that I could find. I see that you're sketching as we go, and hope that there's a little more thought and public discussion given to this. I've been involved with the Wilson Green, which is the name of the green space that you're moving the sidewalk into since we established it as a public green space in 1986 and created a nonprofit, Blair Street Gardens, Inc., which has raised probably around $85,000 to $90,000 for upgrading and maintaining the green spaces around this intersection. I am fully in support of a bike track because I'm a cyclist myself, and this is practically a route that I follow anyway. But I want you to, and others have mentioned this as well, is that we'd much rather see the median narrowed and that being used for street or given over to green space and maybe even outdoor eatery space on the north side of Wilson, and on the south side of Wilson, a wider street terrace or something, maybe even a larger turning radius for cars entering from Wilson to John Nolan Drive. Also, if you've been out there and watched traffic at almost any hour, including rush, there's hardly ever a need for more than for 2 lanes to cross over to Williamson Street. There's usually 2 to 5 cars at the most per light. So the idea of having 2 lanes seems to be unnecessary. A dedicated left turn, I kind of understand that, but that could be, those 3 things could be merged together. I think that if we can leave the existing public sidewalk as it is and make all of your changes outside that, we'd be much better off. I'd like to hear what the Wisconsin Council for the Blind would say to building the curb right next to the public sidewalk along there between John Nolan Drive, crossing the tracks, and then up to the garden space as well. I think this needs some reworking. This has the potential to become a really great space that serves everyone, but I think it's kind of wasted with that median and with an additional drive lane that appears to be unnecessary that's eastbound. As for public review, it sounds to me like you're still sketching out some ideas. Is the Traffic Commission going to get another look at this, or is somebody else going to see this? Will we get a chance to see this? And I thank you for your time.
So I'll just say this is the second time that the Transportation Commission has seen it, and the request this evening is to refer it back to the council, so certainly other people will see it. But Bridget, why don't you go ahead, and then Alder Rummel, and then any other discussion.
Yeah, I just had an operational question about how this might work. So if we can go back to the, I guess, for lack of a better term, sort of the north-south intersection there. So changing the, I guess, northbound lane that would be now a left turn only lane. And then at the same time, you have the southbound lane where folks would now have to come up through the intersection to be able to turn right going south. Does that make sense? So you've got kind of the opposite. You have 2 turn lanes that are now being funneled into the one essentially westbound lane on Wilson. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. Yeah. So we are, part of the goal here was to try to set this up as close to a typical intersection as we could. So this would almost turn into a more typical intersection of a minor road with a more arterial road, where you could have separate movements turning onto a single travel lane. But, this situation, the left turns off of northbound John Nolan would have to yield to the southbound right turns. So we'd only have one vehicle entering here at a time.
Yeah, and so would there still be sort of that, I just can't quite tell, would there still be kind of that, almost that center waiting area? I suppose since now that would only be a left turn lane, it won't be so much of an issue with traffic trying to get by. But I'm just wondering for, so that this is an intersection I'm at several times a day. And so I'm just thinking through how that would work. Oftentimes folks are trying to turn left there so quickly before the oncoming traffic or during a slight break in the oncoming traffic that trying to have them trying to do so well, some folks are going straight and some folks are also turning into that same lane. I'm just wondering if there's any signalization that could maybe help with some of that. Or do you need sort of both the north and the southbound to have greens at the same time to be able to keep traffic flowing?
Yes, we do. So the signalization phase in here is a little unusual in that, so north and south have green at the same time. And then Williamson has their own dedicated phase, and then Wilson has their own dedicated phase because of the dual lefts here. One thing that we are doing with the project to help us is we are putting in the dedicated left turn lane, especially for northbound John Nolan, is where more of the left turns happen. And there is 250 feet or so of queuing space here. So there should be ample space where these left turning vehicles now won't feel so rushed to kind of get out of the way of oncoming traffic, and they won't have such a tight area that they're waiting in. But
will they have enough time? Will they have extra time on the light? So what often happens, of course, is that you can't get through that light if you're turning left because the southbound traffic is going the whole time.
So I don't think we're planning to put in a protected phase there for left turns. That we just didn't have the time in that signal to do that. Okay,
that is just a little concerning, especially given too. It looks like that folks will still be able to come out of the Machinery Row lot there and potentially try and cross traffic. So coming out of and then try and cross traffic and make a left turn still, or will that be prohibited now?
I guess technically they could try to come out of this driveway and get to this left turn lane. But with how close this is to the intersection, we're expecting that most vehicles are just going to turn into that near side right turn lane onto Williamson Street, except for the few that may try to get through here onto northbound John Nolan.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it'll be more difficult. It's problematic, especially early in the morning with folks like coming out of yoga classes and such from the studio and trying to get up to the Capitol to work. So I guess if there's a way to make that more difficult, it would probably help with traffic flow.
Yeah, we could look at tightening that up as much as possible. This is a truck access point for deliveries to the machinery businesses too. Okay. So we were a little limited. One thing to note that, this is really only focusing on the main intersection here, but with this project going up Blair Street, we will be installing a signal at Main Street as well.
Oh, okay, great.
So there will be more opportunities here for people to get to and from downtown, especially from some of these side streets too.
Yeah, trying to cross at Main on a bike is so difficult. So that would be really helpful there. Thanks.
Is that all you had, Bridget?
Yes.
Okay. Alder Rummel, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. I got a heads up about this meeting, so I didn't really plan to be here, but I was able to attend. And hearing the last couple of speakers, I share their concerns. As a person who also drives this intersection, well, I did a lot more before March, but I agree. The outbound lane or the East Wilson lane that goes into Willie Street, we don't need 2 lanes. I don't see the need for it, because the way they reconfigured the street, you're really only entering into that lane, and you eventually can, and with the changes that look like they're proposed, it looks like it only will be 1 lane. So I'm not really clear why there would be 2 lanes there on East Wilson at all, going straight forward. I also understand from somebody texting me that there's another public speaker, Jeff Kusel, on the line, who also worked with the garden. So please keep an eye out for him. And also, I really agree with Bridget's comments. First of all, I don't know how many people coming down Blair Street turn left onto Willie Street. I'm sure there are some. I personally have never done it once in 30 years. I consciously reorganized my travel to never do that. For all the reasons that were mentioned, because you never get through the oncoming traffic, at least the way it was, and it just seems so dangerous. So I just wanted to say that. So, at some point, it just seems to me like, could we make that no turns into Willie Street from that direction? That might solve the problem that Ms. Brown raised. And I think the way that the discussion when Alder Grant was speaking about the reconfiguration, it kind of makes, I get what the conflict would be, but again, if you got rid of one of the lanes, I think that could address the concerns he raised about how you merge in the Sharrow with the turn lane and not create more conflicts. And this has been one of those projects I've been sort of following for years. So I'm really pleased with all the progress we've made, and I think we're getting there, but I just want to make sure it's the best that we can be before we let it go. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Chris, did you have some response to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Chris Pedikowski with City Engineering. I've had a lot of background with this intersection. Been working on this for years and years with Alder Rummel and Alder Bevere, with our corridor study before, and the new Wilson Street corridor study, and then obviously these jobs. So with respect to those left turns on Blair Street, it probably is a good idea to remind folks the reason this project became federally funded was because of rear end accidents with the issues that you guys are talking about as far as not feeling comfortable turning left. And this project is creating those lanes, those left turn lanes that don't exist. And that's why we got the federal funding for this safety project, at least a good chunk of the reason why. And then also, probably, maybe folks don't remember either, but we had this geometry approved, I think probably by the Ped Bike Commission before, and the east-west portion was already built last year with Wilson Street. So what we're really left with, the reason we did it in 2 pieces was because of the state process taking a long time, and 151 being a state highway, we had to work through with the state. So really the focus of this project was to do the Blair and John Nolan portions of the project, and in doing so, the reason for some of these changes that Jim has shown here with the cycle track is more due to the fact that the cycle track is now being approved in the Wilson Street corridor study. So a lot of these decisions as far as, how many lanes, which way, and should we have left turn lanes there, a lot of that stuff was already kind of approved in a geometry approval before. So just a little bit of background and some of the history here.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Do we have another public speaker?
Yeah, but he's actually Jeffrey Kissel. He's actually registered on 6, which was referred. I'm not sure how you'd like to proceed.
Number 6 is Cedar Street.
Right.
Jeffrey, is that what you wanted to register for, or did you want to register for the intersection of Blair and John Nolan?
Blair Street.
I beg your pardon?
Can you hear me? Blair Street is what I want to register.
Okay, so it sounds like it was the wrong number. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would echo all the comments of Gary Tippler. I'd also like to say I appreciate the comments of Alder Rummel. I worked for 27 years as president of the Blair Street Gardens Committee, and there are an awful lot of neighborhood effort has gone into this parcel of property and the property across the street. A lot of tender loving care for many volunteers over the years. It's a very highly improved parcel. All the lawn area is on an automatic sprinkler system, and the garden bed itself is also on a sprinkler system. There is a great deal of improvement in the soil area of the garden that has been done over the years. It is susceptible to damage from road salt, and oftentimes there is damage to the lawn. If the path were moved in front of the gardens directly, you get the low road salt into the garden bed, almost certainly, and that would cause the death of whatever plants are in there. The garden needs an appropriate setback to be viewed properly. And I think there are some possibilities here that we could do a different design and protect the gardens and satisfy most of the concerns that others have. And I'd like to take a look at, take the time to take a look at what we might be able to do. So I would oppose the project as stands.
Anybody have any questions for the registrant? Okay, we've had a lot of discussion about this. Alder Foster, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm with the registrant that the gardens that we're talking about are on the Wilson side. Yeah, up where the hand is. Those are the gardens that we're talking about. Is that correct?
Yes, including the lawn area, which is all sprinkled.
Okay, and it's not in reference to the lawn area to the south along John Nolan where the proposed bus stop is going to be.
Well, that little history of that landscaping that's there, the red cedar, I think primarily, was put in by the city as part of the landscaping for the 1985 Blair Street Improvement Project. That era. And if it's all wiped out now, I just wonder whether or not there'd be room for any landscaping at all. But in a sense, it deletes that landscaping, I think.
But your primary concerns are around the more established gardens that are on the...
Yes, that we did not actively maintain that area. That area, although it's green space, has been maintained by city parks, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we've had a lot of discussion. Where are we at relative to what people think about what's in front of us? The request is to move this along to the Common Council, send it back with our recommendation. What are your preference? I see no hands. Anybody? Bridget?
Yeah, I guess, is it possible to hear from the city planning folks about what they would see as the possibility of working with the garden volunteers on a modification that could meet everyone's needs?
Sure. So currently the project as it stands does not impact the gardens at all. So part of the discussion here is going to be the future work with the cycle track along Wilson Street, 2024-ish. So this project does set it up for that work in the future, but the project as laid out does not impact the gardens at all. With the corridor study on Wilson Street, we did take great care to make sure that where we're moving the sidewalk was only going to be in the lawn space and not actually impacting the garden itself. I did hear tonight that there is a sprinkler system in there that we'll have to recognize, and there would probably be some impacts there with the sidewalk work coming into the lawn area, depending on where the actual sprinkler heads are set and some of those things. But the primary garden area itself wouldn't be impacted. And then in terms of salt damage, we would certainly still try to keep it as far away from the garden layout as possible. And then potentially to try to limit some of the salt that may drain into there off of the sidewalk, we could look at doing a curb edge along that edge of sidewalk to make sure that it's not going to kind of spray over into the garden area, try to protect those plants a little bit better or something like that. But there will be some opportunities for us to do something with the future project to try to protect the garden as much as possible.
Anything else, Bridget? Okay. All right. So, Grant.
Thank you. I just, Alder Rummel had raised the question, and I think one of the registrants as well, around the need for the 2 through lanes kind of outbound through there. And as Chris has said, this, the sort of big picture components were already reviewed and approved, a couple of years back. But I guess if staff could just speak to why the recommendation to have 2 travel lanes through this section might be helpful for people then to get a sense of why that's being proposed.
I can try with that. I might need a little help from Yang, or but basically when we picked this design out of a number of like 9 or 10 alternatives that we were looking at, we were kind of accepting a pretty low level of service for cars and a higher level of service for peds and bikes. And even with that extra lane, the intersection didn't operate quite so well for vehicles. And basically, what the reasoning for that is you only have so much time for these car movements to go, and you need that extra. Based on the configuration that we chose here, you need that extra time or that extra space for those eastbound cars to make the intersection work correctly. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we needed that extra space based on the time that we've allowed to these other movements in the intersection. We needed that extra lane to get those cars through.
Yang, go ahead if you have something else to add.
Sure. I just want to add to Chris' comment. Chris is correct on that. My recollection is that when we are working with a consultant on the corridor study and getting the option approved at the Bike Motor Vehicle Commission, the consideration that in order to make everything work, to provide a lot of time for pedestrians and bicycles, and also have a safe split face, what we call split face for the the eastbound, westbound. We are really tight on signal timing. So how many cars we can push through is a function of time and the space, right? So if we can only give them a very limited amount of time, we have to give them more lanes to work with. So I thought that was kind of the trade-off came up at consultant at the time. So, but we can definitely double check, look into it to see whether we can do something over there.
Thank you, Yang.
Thank you.
Harold.
Just a quick comment on that. I mean, I think, you know, you did all the work, but as you said, it's been a couple of years ago. And so I do wonder, I mean, we've previously at the commission talked about the opportunities afforded by the change in traffic volumes in the context of COVID-19 and possible whatever comes after that. So maybe that changes some things, or maybe it will not change them, but I think it might be worth looking again.
Okay, thank you, Harold.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, we'll consider that. Also, I think Chris had another really good point. Is that the safety funding we got, you know, is another consideration as well. You know, typically when they approve something, they want when they fund a project, they want a certain level of kind of operational effectiveness. So, you know, for motor vehicles, so we have to be careful on that as well. So, but really good point.
Thank you, Yang. Grant, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I guess I was, maybe Alder almost got her hand up. Maybe I let her go first.
Okay, Alder Rummel, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, since somebody said earlier that in 2024, East Wilson will be reconstructed, it seems to me that it would be a chance to start gathering data about, I mean, we know about COVID, but what's post-COVID, and have some more information at that point, and maybe include some changes again into this intersection. I mean, it just seems like, I mean, you know, like I said, I don't really go it every day anymore like I did, but it just doesn't really, my random experience is that there's never so much capacity that we need all that extra space. I just haven't seen it. So if it's really true, I would hope you could show it to us so that people like me who are just, you know, anecdotal have some more to judge the facts on. Thank you.
Okay, Grant, go ahead.
So just wondering from staff, obviously the goal is to you know, get approval here tonight and move this through. Can you speak to the timing of the overall project? And you heard earlier kind of a request to give folks a little bit more opportunity to look at it, but what would that do to the project timeline if that were the case?
Who can answer that?
I can start, and Jim, let me know if I'm wrong on anything. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is approve the geometry so that we can finalize the plans and start the real estate process. And with WISDOT, you know, we're going to follow all the eminent domain procedures, and we need a number of, we need a good handling of the geometry before we can start buying easements needed for the project. And I think, so it would be our preference, surely, to see if this geometry could get approved and at this time, so that we can give our real estate staff enough time to purchase the easements before the project gets bid out next fall. And I think with respect to the gardens, I really do think, you know, as Jim mentioned, this project doesn't impact the gardens at all, and I think we can work with that future Wilson Street job to try to minimize that further and see if there's some more ideas to look at in that regards. So I guess my recommendation would be to for those reasons to you know, move forward with the geometry approval.
Thanks, Chris. Does it go to the council after this?
Yeah, we go to board and council. Yep.
And the council on the September 1st, and board is when?
the 19th, so a week from tonight would be board.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I would move approval with the ask to look at that last look at the curb line in the area that we talked about, Jim. Yeah.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second to that motion? Chris, is that a second?
Yep.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Alder Rummel. So we're open for discussion now.
Thank you. I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I just was reminded by my constituents that the gardens exceed the area we were discussing, but also impede your MG&E where that's part of the gardens too. And so there is more than just one location where the impacts will be felt by these proposed changes.
I think it's further south, Jim. The in between the railroad and Williamson Street.
Like north of the railroad is what impacted.
Yeah, that area is needed to create that left turn lane. We have to push out.
That I just was sharing the comments from my constituents that the focus on the working with the gardens is more than just that one location. There are they've done stuff all parts of that intersection. So
I think you know, with the final details of the plans, we can reach out to these folks and kind of maybe meet them out there and go over the impacts and see what we can do to minimize things.
Great, thank you. And overall, I mean, I think, you know, Chris did remind me that, you know, the earlier phase was already done. So what's before you, I think is, you know, I mean, there probably can be some tweaks, but generally a very positive improvement. So thank you.
There's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this. Is there further discussion? Was that all you had, Alder Rummel?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? I don't see any hands. So we have a motion to approve the resolution with the agreement that city engineering will look at the curb line in the area that we discussed. And also, and not included in the motion, but the understanding that you'll reach out to the folks in the garden and work with them as well. So I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody would like us to take a roll call vote. If so, would you please raise your hand? Otherwise we'll assume unanimous consent. I do not see any hands raised. Want to make sure because we've had a lot of discussion about a lot of different things. Okay, I see no raised hands, so the motion is carried. Thanks very much. This is a lot of hard work has gone into that project. So Chris and Jim and everybody, thanks so much for that. And thanks to the Alder Rummel and all the alders and all the members of the public who have had a lot of great input in this and folks on the commission. So thanks very much. So we'll move on to number 7, which is the Mansion Hill Avenue roadway geometry. Who's going to take that, Chris?
I can start it, and I think we have Sean Malloy here as well to help.
Okay.
So this is not actually a public works project, but this is a new plat that came before the city and was approved by the Plan Commission and Council just recently. And we're getting close to setting up our developers agreements. And Sean Yang and myself wanted to kind of touch base on some of the road layout before we got too far down the road. So let me share my screen here.
Thanks, Alder Rummel. See ya.
Are you guys seeing a map?
Yep, we are now. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so, and Sean put these together, so I'll just kind of briefly introduce them here. But this map kind of shows more of the regional area. This is on the far west side of the city. This is Pleasant View Road and Midtown Road here, as to kind of orient yourselves. The plat in question is this area right here. It's basically the north half of what is called the Tice parcel. The Tice owns this farming parcel. They sold the northern half here to a developer, and the plat is, as I mentioned, approved, and that's kind of the area we're talking about. So Mansion Hill Road is a fairly decent size collector road that would tie into this plat. The neighborhood plan shows that, let me zoom in here. So this is the area again we're talking about. Mansion Hill Road extending to the west and tying into Waterbend Road here with a new intersection at County M. And then our neighborhood plan also shows Micah Road extending north-south through this area. So those are the two roads we're primarily interested in getting your feedback on. This, I think, is a map of bike and pedestrian facilities of the neighborhood development plan. Right now, there is a path that's built in the park that terminates right here at the edge of our plat. The MPO actually shows that extending to the west and tying into our Ice Age Junction path that runs up and down County M. The neighborhood plan doesn't show that, but the MPO plan does. So we're trying to plan for that in this plat. So this is kind of a zoom in of the, let me back up. So this would be a kind of a zoom in of this intersection, this east-west Mansion Hill Road and the north-south of Micah in this area. So what we were proposing here is that bike path that we mentioned before. The idea, I believe, around that bike path is kind of an east-west connection path through the neighborhood. And what we're trying to do here with the project is tie it up to Pleasant View Road, where we have our north-south major bike path facility that was just built last year. So the concept that Sean's drawn up here is to have basically one lane in each direction on each road, Micah and Mansion Hill, parking on both sides of the street. This is a very densely developed parcel. These parcels will be, they're slated for, four-story apartment buildings. So we're planning for parking along these streets and looking at a roundabout in the intersection there to try to calm traffic a bit. And also looking at sidewalk on both sides of the street, but in the one exception where we're thinking of taking this bike path and taking connecting that west to Pleasant View Road as a 10-foot bike path. So in this case on Mansion Hill, we'd be looking at bike lanes and the bike path, the off-street path, if that's the way we go. That Mansion Hill to the east does have that same section, so we're basically continuing that two lanes vehicle, 2 lanes bike lanes, 2 lanes parking. And like I said, so we're not at the point where we're getting ready to issue plans. Obviously, these aren't final plans, but what we're trying to get a handle on from the commission is your thoughts on the layout and whether or not we do want the bike path to extend to the west, off street, and I guess get your feedback on some of these widths before they record the plat and officially sign off on all those right-of-way widths.
Okay, comments or questions? Alder Foster, Grant, go ahead, and then Harold.
Thanks. Do you, what's the proposed typical cross section for that? I think it's 48 foot curb to curb. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so this is a Micah west, I'm sorry, Mansion Hill west of Micah, Mansion Hill east of Micah, and then this is the north-south road. So these are the two east-west roads, depending on if you're east or west of Micah, and this is the north-south road. So again, as I mentioned, we got one lane in each direction, bike lanes in each direction, and parking on both sides. And then the side path on that north side of the street. So as I mentioned before, I think what we're trying to do is get that kind of east-west connection across the plat. The other thing I should mention is there's some pretty extreme grades out here. So let me back up a bit. There's this Micah Road will end up being about 8% heading up a hill to a crest that's essentially at the north end of the plat, right here. Let me go back to the aerial view. So right here is kind of a crest of a pretty large hill. This is all sloping down, and the MPO showed that east-west path kind of connecting in over through this plat and connecting to the north-south path in this fashion. And that, for one thing, that bisects the park. It also bisects their lots, and so if we were able to get that east-west path along Mansion Hill, then they could cross with a potential future signal in the future. And I thought that would be a better. We thought that would be a better location to have that east-west path continue and connect up with the Ice Age Junction path. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it is a smart idea. It makes sense to me. One thought, just in terms of the kind of roundabout design, maybe just think about where the crossing of that path would be through there, which will you'd want it to be a little bit further north, and so just kind of path alignment, match up with that rather than hugging the roadway. That which might be good to do that in the plat right now, so there's no issues in the future. And then in terms of sort of having that plus, the on-street lanes, I know in the past there's been feedback that that's really important so that you get both kinds of cyclists. I think in this age where we're trying to be thoughtful about how much concrete we put down and, having space for infiltration, all those sorts of things, my preference would be to make sure that the separated facility works well for everybody, that, that off-street path works well for everybody. And I think particularly in this case, if it's going up against Pleasant View, you're not going to have cyclists riding on Pleasant View itself, likely as compared to the side path there. So I guess I'm not sure if there would even be a need for, or a lot of value in having the on-street lanes in addition to a path for that section. So I guess just something to think about, and could potentially, use that space for wire terraces and infiltration and that sort of thing. In terms of the kind of cross-section designs there, I would say if we didn't have the side path and we were going to rely on the on-street lanes, I would like to see just one more foot on each side. So instead of a 14-foot parking and bike lane, just getting it up to 15 feet. gives just a lot better experience with the car doors and all that, especially when it's 10-foot lanes. So just kind of, I guess, for future reference, if we can do 15, that's preferable to the 14. And I'm assuming Micah is expected to be a pretty low volume street where there's no bike facilities really warranted there. It's just a kind of a local street. Is that right?
Yeah, and we also, Sean and I were toying with the idea of when this plat goes, extending this bike path to the north so that people would preferably use that than instead of Micah. So we'd probably have a tee off into this plat, and I think that would be probably more the primary movement north-south for bikes.
Yeah, that all looks good to me. Thank you.
Harold, you're next.
Thank you. I think some of the points have already been made. So it sounds like there's not going to be a signal at Pleasant View, at least initially, because I mean, my concern is people walking and biking getting across Pleasant View, which since the rebuild is this pretty massive road with bus lane, 2 travel lanes, bike lanes, and all that. So that would be one of my concerns.
Yeah, so we installed the plumbing with the project for the signal, so it wouldn't require any tearing up the road. And I think it would be just a matter of once that street is now there, you know, it would be put on that list when it met warrants for a signal.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, I mean, did you consider, I mean, so you're having the bike path on one side and on the other side just a regular sidewalk? I mean, having one-way directional bike paths on either side, was that a consideration?
Can I just add, would you not have on-street bike lane then, Harold, just have bike paths on both sides?
Yes, no, that would, I mean, you definitely do not
Right.
need all of the above. No,
Right,
yeah, I
which
mean, I think I fully agree with Grant's point that if you have high quality off-street bike facilities, that's preferable to having both on-street and off-street facilities of dubious quality. So, I mean, yeah, focusing on getting high quality off-street, and I think that often means having one directional on both sides so that people don't have to make those crossing movements as much.
So Chris, what are your thoughts about that?
I guess we could look into that. I guess kind of what I wanted to hear is that we didn't need more space to do something else. So if we were, you know, we could kind of work through those details. You know, the critical, why I wanted to bring it here informationally so quickly is because before they record the plat, I wanted to make sure we were on the same board with options here. So I think we could look into that. One thing that I've heard is, you know, with those separated ones that are one way on one side and one way on the other side, it's kind of, I think the one drawback of that is if you're riding down and you decide you forgot something, you need to go back and you don't want to cross the road, right? You just want to stay on the path you're on and turn around and go. So but we can look into that.
Renee is on here. Renee, did you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I definitely think there's pros and cons, but I do think like we're using a lot of space out there and a lot of the use is going to be on the path, and depending on the volumes of the street, someone who isn't a path rider will probably feel comfortable on this street. I don't think, I mean, I know there's a lot of apartments, but it's not going to be a huge volume street. So, but obviously there's pros and cons to a path versus one way. And, you know, people on the ones that are one way probably out here would just go both ways a lot of times. But is that the end of the world? It does fit nicely with the bike lanes that are already there going onto a facility like that. So I think we can explore this a little bit more as it gets closer to actually being built.
Is that all you had, Harold?
Yes, and just maybe thinking a little bit more, as Grant said, about the roundabout design. And I think that's also going to be impacted, whether it's going to be one way or two way, because I think some of the roundabouts are not a great walking and biking experience, and making sure we have enough space to make that work well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Bill, you're next, and then Chris.
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to look at the use of the roundabout, and I'm very happy to see this at this location. So I'd like to see that used more often, especially when you have the opportunity to do it as this kind of project where you're going into new land. So we don't have to worry about trying to buy right away for roundabouts after the fact. So I'm glad to see the roundabout is the plan for this. Thanks.
Okay. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. My initial reaction to this is just, that it's a ton of pavement for low density development. I know it's the pattern, it's the geometry that's already out there a lot. But for low volume streets, I just have trouble seeing how the city can afford to keep taking on so much pavement for low density development like this. We have effective roads downtown that are much narrower. I appreciate that we're making these roads do a lot, that we're accommodating the bikes and the parking and everything. It's just, I would expect to see these cross sections getting narrower. That would be my thought moving forward.
Do other people agree with Grant that maybe it's better to not have the bike lanes and focus more on the path and skinny the street up in that regard?
Who wants to comment on that? Yang, I see your hand up. Anybody else? Bridget, go ahead. Yang, did you have a comment before Bridget goes ahead?
Bridget can go first.
Okay, Bridget, go ahead. And then I've got Yang and then Sean.
Yeah, I just would say that I think that in general, I would agree with that concept of, focusing on a multimodal path as opposed to having to have both a path and bike lanes. However, when you have a roundabout, that can be sort of problematic for, folks who want to perhaps go straight. So as long as there's some accommodation, a reasonable, understandable accommodation for folks who are biking or walking, who don't necessarily want to, follow the path of the multimodal path, but want to instead go in a different direction. As long as that's accommodated, I think it's okay. But if that can't be accommodated within the design of the roundabout, then I think that there have to be some on-street accommodations for those uses, or signage or curb cuts or something to allow people to get where they want to go efficiently.
Okay, I have Yang and then Sean. That was all you had, right, Bridget? Okay.
Just want to see great discussions here, and just maybe just want to provide some information. I think the first piece of information is that I think for Harrod's idea about one-way directional protected bike lanes on each side of the street. We do have an example in the city on Bassett Street. That actually works pretty well, although occasionally we observed folks riding in the wrong direction, but overall has been working really well. And by talking with other colleagues around the country, some cities actually wants to do more and more of those instead of bi-directional on one side. They think that's a safer design overall. But there are definitely pros and cons. Second, I want to point out that I think that no matter what we do, crossing the roundabouts for the paths, I think we'll have to pay a lot of attention to the details. And we actually start to use more and more of the neighborhood roundabouts for the new developments when we still have the control on how much right away we can get, just as Bill mentioned. So because we're doing more and more of those, and we're trying to provide more ages or abilities by facilities, I think we need to really start how to think about those small details at a crossing, roundabout crossings. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I've got Sean and then Grant and then Ken.
Yeah, this is Sean here. I just wanted to point out that some of the reason why I had the bike lanes on the streets was due to the roundabout turning movements. At the roundabouts, we have to have a certain width to make all those turning movements work. So if we remove the bike lane, I guess it would sort of act as like a bump out sort of deal. So that, I guess it's just one of the challenges we're going to have to look at. It is nice to have that bike lane in there because it makes vehicles, feel a little tighter and maybe not go as fast, but also does allow turning movements for larger vehicles such as a bus, which just looking at the road network out here, that could be a possibility of a bus route. Not speaking for Metro Trans, but that was kind of our thoughts. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, thank you, Sean. We have Grant, then Ken, then Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of that question of the sort of one-way bike facilities, I mean, there are certainly some advantages to having one-way protected lanes. Some of the reasons why I think the two ways are good in our circumstances is, one of the big ones is just that we have so many two-way paths in our city, so that people are really used to that. And so I think, as I think Chris said, like if you build a one-way one and it's not going to be super surprising to see people going the other direction. And I think people in Madison are really used to biking and also walking and biking on 10-foot wide two-way multi-use paths. So I think there's something to that. That's people understand how those work. So one thing I would maybe recommend looking at is getting rid of the on-street bike lanes and perhaps just doing a 10-foot two-way paths on both sides. So he's sort of addressing what Harold brings up, which I think is a good point, because if you only have it on one side, it does cause issues. So you likely will have some people then riding on the sidewalk. So maybe just sort of going with a two-way path on both sides is another good potential option. And it basically is just 10 foot instead of 5 for a sidewalk. And then the other thing I was going to say, Bridget raised the point, which was a good one, about the roundabouts making it more difficult for crossings. And it's part of why I advocate for not having the on-street bike lanes, is because if we can't make the crossings good for those that are going to be using the path, which is definitely going to be a lot of kids, it'll be seniors. I think we need to figure out a final roundabout design that will work well for them, where they're going to feel safe, where it's going to work well. And so I think, we shouldn't have on-street bike lanes as sort of a workaround for those that don't want to deal with a bad roundabout design. So I think it's kind of good that we press ourselves to come up with that good design. And one thing relevant to this question of platting, I think, would be potentially growing the area around the roundabout a little bit, and making sure we've got really nice refuge islands for each of the legs, because that's, I think, one of the best things that we can do to make that better, is really having just one directional car traffic that you're crossing at a time. So that might be worth looking at, just expanding that out a little bit around the roundabout if needed. And then Sean brought up the point of the bike lanes kind of needing that space for the turning movements anyway. And perhaps this would be a place we could look at the kind of mountable curb or mountable aprons for larger vehicles, where you can still kind of tighten up that circle that way for cars, so they have to slow down, but still allow larger vehicles to mount it. And if you don't have a on-street bike lane to deal with, you might be able to use that in the design. Thanks.
Okay, Bill, you're next.
Thank you. I agree with Alder Foster, and I think I would prefer the two-way paths on each side and then narrowing up the roadway. I also would like to just reinforce what I spoke before about the roundabout and roundabouts, that we can perhaps maybe use this kind of a model for future developments like this, because I think, you know, all the other work that we're doing with the traffic calming, I look at this as we're building in a traffic calming from the very get-go, and this roundabout will keep traffic speeds in this area. I think will help a lot more than having to try to come in after the fact and put in speed humps and so forth. But I think we're doing it right if we try the roundabout at the very beginning of the project. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. So I don't see any more hands up. Any further? Great discussion, and thanks for bringing it to us early so that we can have this opportunity to look at it ahead of time. A lot of great feedback from people. Any additional thoughts? Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, next we're on item 8. I believe we have a public registrant here. Is that correct? If we do, we'll have just a brief presentation by staff and then go to the public registrant before we have our discussion.
We do.
Okay. Is that Lynn Pauley? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Tom Moore, why don't you go ahead and I think I saw Tom on here.
Okay, yeah. Hello again, everyone. So if you remember from last meeting, we talked about staff going back, taking a closer look at kind of the overall neighborhood and coming up with a recommendation instead of just focusing on Spanum, which is what we were doing last meeting. So we went back, looked at it, and we've got 2 options here on the map. The first option is looking at speed humps. So to give you some background, it has always been our policy to not install speed humps on unimproved streets. That's not written into anything. It's not written into the neighborhood traffic management manual, or it wasn't in the resolution adopted by the Common Council back when this was set up. It was just kind of our own internal policy to not do that. And there's a couple reasons for it. One was the fear of drivers driving off into the terrace area because there isn't a curb there to kind of make that barrier. And another issue is water drainage. So the way we would like to proceed here in our recommendation is to include both Spanum and Maher in the neighborhood traffic management program. And I've got these potential speed hump locations listed on here. And this is just kind of going off aerials and contour maps, but water drainage is kind of the issue that we want to make sure we're looking at closely, because these unimproved streets aren't constructed as uniformly as streets that have curb and gutter. So streets with curb and gutter typically have a nice crown to it, and there's a 2% slope from the crown to the gutter, but a lot of these streets, they can be very flat. Some have dips in them, and water kind of sits there after a rain event. So before committing to any location, we would probably have a walkthrough with engineering to identify some locations, and then propose those to the residents. But I just identified some low-lying areas that I think for sure we don't want to try to put speed humps in, but we would still have to look at the crown of the street and then the condition of the street. But with my initial talks with engineering, we think that we can try this on some of these streets. And since from our last meeting, we kind of got into the discussion of, well, if you put a stop sign here, then you're going to need one over here. And then you end up putting up stop signs everywhere. And that's something we just really don't want to do, because they're not a lot of reasons that we've talked about before, the safety of it, the drivers not following the stop signs because I think they're a nuisance, speeding between stop signs. So of the two options of stop signs or of trying speed humps, we wanted to go ahead and try speed humps. And the one other thing I can say is that last fall, traffic engineering purchased a temporary speed hump, and that's something that we could try prior to putting in a permanent speed hump. So we've got one temporary speed hump that's a rubber speed hump that you bolt into the street, and we could try that in one location out here just to see how it goes. But that's our recommendation. That I guess I'm open up to questions.
So Tom, if I can just clarify, so you would try it this summer, but suggest that Maher and Anna be included in the neighborhood traffic management program for the speed humps when they come to the Transportation Commission later on. So what exactly would you be asking the Transportation Commission for this evening before we get into the public speaker and the discussion?
Just wanted feedback on the overall thinking of not going with stop signs on unimproved streets like this, and trying speed humps. So.
Okay, should we go with and hear from Lynn Pauley and then get into the discussion?
Lynn, there you go.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say, just to thank you for going back and looking at that. And I think that originally I spoke at the last meeting and suggested the stop signs. And I think the speed humps that you're talking about make a lot of sense, much more sense. And one of the main reasons is because there's a corner. In option 2, you have an always stops on Spanum and Hobb and Maher and Hobb. And the Maher and Hobb corner going west, if someone were driving on Hobb Street going west and they hit the stop sign on Maher, that's a really steep hill. So in the snow, I think it would be a little treacherous and just treacherous for a driver because it is kind of an incline going up. So if it was snowing and they're going up and then had to stop right away, I think that it would be kind of a problem. So that was my main thing I wanted to say. And thank you. I think that the speed humps make a lot of sense.
Okay, Chris and then Ken.
Thanks. So I like that I appreciate about this that we're now looking at Spanum and Mar together. I think that was one of the issues that came up last time, and I think that's necessary when we're looking at these traffic calming problems. So thank you for that. Last time we talked about this, I sort of said I was surprised to see that we were considering stop signs as traffic calming because of the things we've discussed, but that I actually liked to see that we were looking at that. So I think that, and we've heard the challenges and concerns about putting speed humps on these roads. We heard that last time. That was the message that we were getting. So I would actually like to see moving forward with the option 2, the stop signs. And since we're talking about, possibly doing a temporary speed hump and seeing if it works, I don't see why that wouldn't be the case with stop signs also, given that they're low cost. And, we've talked about them being a viable option in this location. That would be where I'm leaning.
Okay, Ken, you're next.
On the one sheet that has the 8 yellow block information as far as vehicles per day and all that, I'm assuming that was done pre-COVID?
Yes, all the data was pre-COVID. On the previous sheet that has some Turner Avenue data, that data was prior to the stop signs that we installed on Turner Avenue, but the data that's shown here was after the Turner Avenue additional stop signs were installed.
So all I'm saying is, as far as if we install this, the time frame for evaluating efficacy is going to have to be after La Follette refills, right? Because we're assuming that's
to get a good comparison of the previous data. Yeah, it would be better to do it during school.
Okay.
You're talking about the speed hump test, Ken?
Well, just in general, I'm not saying wait until school comes back. I'm just saying, I think we can go ahead and do the calming kind of stuff, but we're not going to be able to get feedback right away because my assumption is that that parking lot generates a lot of the cut through traffic, or the parking lot and/or parents or other people picking their kids up and dropping them off. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
Thanks. I believe I'm speaking in support of what Tom has spoke to us tonight of his proposed and recommended direction of using the portable speed hump as an experiment, and I'm glad to hear that, actually, frankly, because I think there may be more uses for that in the future and other projects where we're kind of unknown as far as whether we should try a speed hump or not. And once you put them in, it's expensive to tear it out and you wasted money. But I think to try it with portable, I think makes a lot of sense. So I'm supportive of that. I'm not in favor of adding more stop signs, however. So I think I believe that's what Tom's recommendation was not to install the stop signs at this time. Thanks.
Okay. Harold?
This is a question, and maybe I missed that, and you mentioned that. So the temporary speed hump, is that going to be one that goes curb, or I guess there is no curb, that goes across the whole street? Because I do remember we had previously talked about, speed cushions, which do not extend across the whole lane or the whole curb to curb width. And I think we talked about it in the context of allowing metro buses to go through there with fewer issues, and that wasn't really an option. But given the concerns about stormwater, I do wonder, is it worth thinking about speed cushions where basically they don't extend all the way to the edge of the pavement, and therefore might mitigate some of the stormwater concerns? And maybe if the temporary speed humps actually have that design, then actually, we could test that out, which might be valuable.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the temporary speed hump that we purchased comes in sections. I think it's 3-foot sections, and then you kind of lock it together like a puzzle, and then you bolt each section into the pavement. So I think there's some flexibility. We could set it up as kind of like 2 separate speed humps with a gap in the middle. So there are some options in how we set it up. But that was another thing that we talked about with engineering, possibly shortening the speed hump if we think drainage would be an issue, instead of having it go across the entire length. So yeah, that's something I think that, especially when we go out and walk the street and look at the drainage issues, we would probably make a decision at that point of how we want to test it and then how we would construct a permanent one.
Okay. Grant?
Thanks. And thank you, Tom, and others for working on this. I really appreciate you kind of going outside the normal and, taking a look at sort of this whole area. And I think it's interesting to consider, before the speed humps were just basically sort of off the table. And that's a big part of why we were looking at the stop signs as a way to do something. But I think, if there's a comfort level from engineering to consider speed humps, and especially since we have a temporary one that we could try out, it seems worth kind of going in that direction. So I'm almost wondering maybe we could connect and work on just having a virtual neighborhood meeting. I could send out postcards to folks in these areas, and we could sort of just walk through this with those that live on the route and get a temperature from them about for the overall concept, and ask for support to put in a temporary one. And I think that might give us some good information, and we can see that way, either continue heading in a direction to do permanent speed humps, or reevaluate if it looks like it's not being successful. So I would support that approach, and I appreciate the work that went into this.
Okay, so I've heard at this point, Chris is in favor of option 2, and I've heard Harold, Grant, and Bill say that they're in favor of option 1, at least the testing phase of it, and with some outreach to the neighborhood. Yang, did you have something you wanted to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly. I think we should keep in mind that the implications on trying speed humps on these streets may go beyond these streets. We have never done it before because of the concerns Tom mentioned. So actually, this can be really good test for for whether we can do this on these type of streets. And we have lots of streets like this that are improved and needs traffic coming. So if this goes really well, it means that it opens up a door, for many other possible projects. So yeah, just want to see that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Okay, so I don't think I've heard from Ken, Bridget, or Mike as to whether you would support the speed humps or look more toward the stop signs. Any thoughts from you guys relative to that? At this point, speed humps have the edge. Ken, go ahead.
Speed hump seems like especially temporary, and I'd almost do, if there's a way to evaluate it, if we could put speed humps on one of the 2 streets, not to say that both streets don't need calming, but just to see how much because we had this issue last week of if you calm one street, you just direct it over 2 other streets. And if there's a way that we could have a delay in doing the calming on one of the streets by say 2 months or something like that, and do some counts so that we could then have that information for later times, so that we know that we always have to be careful that if we just calm one street, we do in fact move it over. If what we do is calm one street and the speed comes down, but the other street doesn't get that much additional traffic, then I think that's helpful information for us in future decisions. So I'm just saying, this seems, you couldn't get a better experimental kind of situation than to have these 4 street grids and have the sort of a temporary thing, and then say, let's see what happens when we do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens when we add speed humps 2 months later, what happens? You know, does the traffic return to the first street and go slower or whatever?
Okay, thank you. Bridget and then Mike.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I guess, after Ken's comments, is that an option? I mean, is that acceptable? And is there the staffing to monitor something where, you know, looking at kind of different treatments and then seeing what works?
Yeah, we can definitely get before and after.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, we can definitely get before and after data, especially with the temporary speed hump. And then as far as doing one street, say the temporary speed hump goes great and we want to move forward with permanent speed humps. So I guess we would have the option of just focusing on one street, Spanum or Maher, per year and doing before and after data. But I guess we could look at that when we get to that point. But I do think for sure, no matter what, we're going to collect data on each of these streets when we collect the data, so we can see what effect it's having when we put them in on the other streets.
Okay, good. Does that answer your question, Bridget?
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
What would, I guess from a traffic engineering perspective, what would the idea of using two different treatments and evaluating them sort of in tandem at two different locations at Spanum and at Maher? I mean, is that kosher, or is that would that be acceptable?
You mean trying to speed hump on one and a stop sign on the other?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you'd have to gather some control data for current conditions and, you know, what's going on there now, and then as well as gathering data during, but I'm not familiar enough with, you know, the engineering perspective on that. If would be something that's acceptable, you know, would it be worth the time it would take?
Well, Yang, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the ability to set up tests. So possibly that could be an option if we move forward with, I suppose we could do a test of stop signs or a test of a temporary speed hump now that we have a temporary speed hump, but I think that's how it could be done.
So Bridget, you're in favor of the temporary speed hump idea, but also perhaps testing a stop sign as well? I'm just trying to understand where you're coming down on the options.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you want an option 3?
Absolutely, of course. And in the absence of that, yeah, I'm in favor of option 1. In the absence of being able to look at really both and do a test to compare the effectiveness.
Okay. And then, is that all you had, Bridget? Mike, you're next.
Hi there. Yeah, I have been in favor of, you know, option 1, and then listening with to what Ken just laid out. I liked what Ken had to say and thought that was worth pursuing. So that's my thought on it right now.
Okay. Bill?
Yes, thanks. I think a couple points that I break. I question to Tom. I assume these portables have to come out before you start plowing season?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, you tear them up, I think, with a plow.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other is I think, as far as what Bridget was asking about doing research with stop signs. I think Yang and Tom could probably do a lit search, and you can find a lot of studies of traffic calming showing that stop signs really aren't effective overall. So I don't really know that that's, you know, worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze in my mind as far as stop signs, testing more stop signs. Thanks.
Okay, Yang, go ahead. Yang, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just trying to get myself unmuted.
Sure, you bet. Go ahead.
Yeah, just want to kind of share some thoughts. The potential test and comparison. I think if we decide to, do permanent speed humps on one street and do stop sign on our street and do a test and a comparison, we can definitely do that. However, though, if you just want to, do a one speed hump and comparing to stop sign on our street, that's going to be challenging because typically, if you only have one speed humps, it's not going to work very well. You need a series of them. So that's why we never wanted to just do one speed humps. We do, two at a minimum, preferably three or more. So when you have more speed hump, that's kind of really creates an effect. People will slow down. So if we want to just, do a test using temporary speed humps, so I think the comparison might be a little bit difficult. For Bill's point, that's a really good one. Many literature in the industry shows that stop signs really shouldn't be used for coming traffic. I think it will have an effect reducing the number of cars on the street. But in terms of the speed, it may not do a good job with the speed because people have the research I have seen is that people will stop for a stop sign if they don't ignore it, but they will speed up again once they pass the stop sign. So I just want to share some thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you, Ken. You're next.
Oh, I just wanted to, if you were ready, to move approval of option one.
Okay, there's a motion for approval of option one. There were some suggestions about how to go about it with neighborhood plans and different evaluation. Bill? Is that a second, Bill? Say yes, put thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry, I had to find my mute button on my screen.
That's okay. We have a motion and a second to go with option one. Further discussion. I don't see any hands for further discussion. There were some folks who were not in favor of that. Would we like to do a roll call vote just to make sure? Patrick, could you please go ahead and do that?
Chris McCahill.
Aye. Okay. And Bill Bremer.
Aye.
Ken Stride.
Aye.
Bridget Brown.
Aye.
Grant Foster.
Aye.
And Mike Tierney.
Aye.
Okay. And Harold Cleams.
Aye.
Okay.
Looks like some minds were changed along the way. Okay, so Tom, did you have any last comments or questions? Brant, it sounded like you wanted to get some sort of a neighborhood meeting together.
Yeah, I think Tom, we can follow up after the meeting and talk about next steps. Okay. Anything else for us, Tom, on this?
It sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. This is excellent. This is exactly what we've been talking about in terms of taking a broader view of how to deal with traffic calming. So a really great job. Thanks so much. Next, we have the Shared Streets program, Renee.
Yep, I will just share my screen here.
I say I love the colors this time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Of course, my computer doesn't want to show me that option. Oh, here, the scroll button. There we go. Clearly, I have too many things open. There we go. All right. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of our social distancing streets program that we talked about, a long time ago, back in April, maybe, or even March.
Yeah, it was April, I think.
Yeah, when this pandemic was very sort of at its starting stages, but just as a review, we made some street changes to open up a little more space for people walking and biking, to try to create some space for social distancing in various places. And I wanted to kind of report back on how that's been going. In black are sort of our current social distancing, and this is here. Red are actually, so we have some streets that are more like shared streets where they are just local traffic only, and people are more able to kind of walk and bike in the streets, move around as they need to feel comfortable with physical distancing of 6 feet or more. In one instance on Atwood, we did take a travel lane to create a two-way space for bikes in an area where typically people would ride on the sidewalk. It's very narrow. As you know, Olbrich, there's a bridge. It's on the Lake Loop, so very popular route. And so we have that. And then we have two places where we had local traffic only streets that were removed at the request of the neighborhood. Those came in. They're both sort of neighborhood resource team areas, so underserved areas. They heard a lot of comments. They invited me to come talk about it with the representatives of the area, talk to the alders, and we decided that these particular instances weren't really fitting the needs of the neighborhood. I let them know that if that changed, if they felt that they would see a benefit to this street or different streets being a part of this program, they should reach out. At this point, they have not done either of those. I mean, they have reached out. We've talked about some changes, but not really the type of changes that this program are. They've made some requests. I know I had Tom put a couple projects on the traffic calming list. They were interested in more permanent changes. We talked about different areas where that might be a better fit. They didn't really see this sort of temporary measure. Maybe they felt like, what good is it if it's only 2 months? I want something that I know is going to be there forever. But I have put the offer out to work with them for whatever kinds of changes make sense to them. So those ones have been removed from the program. At Vilas Park Drive, obviously, there was a point in time where shelter reservations, beach use, we went kind of into phase 2 of recovery. And we did have one weekend where that street was reopened. It subsequently has been closed back to traffic. There isn't any local traffic on that street. It is just a park street. However, we continue to work with parks on that and future park needs and discussions around, if there is a desire to reopen that street by parks in the future for park reservations and things like that, creating some different space for people walking and biking, since there is not a sidewalk and the path that goes into the park does end, and then it is just a mixed sort of space. Some people walking in the grass, some people in the street. There is a bike lane for contraflow, but it's not a super defined space. So we have been having that discussion with them. We have not done counts on all the streets, but we have been able to do some counts on Atwood Avenue as a part of just counting vehicles generally. So I did want to report on that. And I would like to say also, this is not like a perfect count. If two people are riding side by side, they may not both be counted. And obviously this is a recreational loop where at times people may be doing that depending on how busy it is. But we have been seeing that about 3.5% to 4% of the traffic on Atwood is bikes in this newly created lane. And that is around 3,000 to 3,700 bikes per week. So I thought that was kind of interesting, you know, knowing that it's not a perfect count and that, you know, some people are still choosing the sidewalk, but I think people have transitioned to the street a lot more as this has gone on and they've become accustomed to it. So that is one thing. And then one thing is that, you know, our signage is perhaps not everything that we would want it to be in terms of explaining this use of these streets, but we have not gotten any new signage out, and that is kind of something that we're working on right now. I think staff time is perhaps a little bit more available to do that. Obviously, we have a lot of competing needs between these sort of temporary things and a lot of long-term projects and just crosswalk painting that's very seasonal, but that is something that we're working on getting out since we do, at this point, intend to keep these up for the season, such as, and you know, for snow plowing, we would want to take these back down. And then we have been talking about a phase 2 of this program for a while. We were looking to launch this right away. We sort of just kind of added Sherman in at one point. It's a bus route. It wasn't one of our first ones, but we wanted to work with Metro to ensure that we didn't impede their access because transit is very important in this corridor as well. So that got added later, and then we were planning to add more. I had encouraged people to contact me with their ideas or ones that they wanted. I had just over 30 people send in sort of ideas. 7 of them were some variation of the whole Lake Loop or parts of the Lake Loop. That was definitely a top interest. And then 5 were sort of Cap City Path and John Nolan kind of related requests, including one to ban fishing. But that seemed, you know, that's such a popular activity with a very diverse crowd of people that that seemed to have its own problems. But we then kind of talked to fire, emergency response is a big deal, Metro is a big deal. That makes some of these challenging. We haven't launched any phase 2. At one point, most of our extra equipment was going to sort of help with street closures around protests. So it was being used heavily for that. And we certainly didn't want to take it away from there as well. But we feel like we're kind of moving towards a point where we would be able to do a few more for the sort of late summer and fall. And we kind of weighted it down to ones that would be most practical from an emergency response and equipment and Metro service, all of the things that you have to juggle in the streets. So in black, I have what are our current streets in this program. We did have one project, it's a little bit like Atwood on Monroe Street to help finish the sort of Lake Wingra loop that's also very popular. To repurpose a lane there where people often travel on the sidewalk because there is not a way to close that gap except for riding on Monroe Street, as well as Lake Mendota Drive. That's an area that has no sidewalks, but has a lot of people do walk there. We had a request in sort of the Brittingham area of that section of West Main on the south side of Proudfoot, Rodney Court and Brittingham Place, where they frequently have people who think that they can cut through to get over to West Washington or get over to Park Street, but those streets do not go through. And they have a large number of people now who are choosing to walk and bike in the street instead of on the path in Brittingham, which is very popular and is getting more crowded all the time. East Wilson Street, where it connects the Capital City Path, also is one that, we're considering, along with Spade Street, some section or the whole thing was another one that seemed to kind of fit from the requests that we got. And so those are kind of the short list right now. We do not have a lot of equipment left. We, as I think you've talked about before, do not have a huge supply of items for pop-up trials and these kinds of temporary closures. And they also get used for a pretty wide array of things throughout the city. So we need to take that into account at this point. But that is kind of what my update is, and I can take questions, and Yang can help as well.
Thanks. Great to see that we're talking about phase 2 and sort of thinking that through. I'm sort of wondering, I think when we initially started doing this, it seemed like a great opportunity to give people some recreational space in places that were maybe low-hanging fruit. And then we saw that it's actually an opportunity to really like fix some problems. So you see, I think you see that on Atwood, right, where we're creating space that was much needed. So I'm wondering, like, is there sort of a formal process to reevaluating some of our initial thoughts? I'm thinking the one I'm specifically familiar with is Mifflin, I think, where it seems to me like it's not getting used a whole lot. I think people are using the sidewalks, and I've sort of heard folks say that they're not even sure why the road's closed. So is that just a matter of communication, or are we sort of, do we need to reassess and sort of figure out where these resources are most needed?
Sure. I mean, I think we can definitely reassess that one. My experience, I don't go there frequently, but is that, people are in the sidewalk sometimes, but it's perhaps not as many spots as you might think where people do that. Whereas, the one on West Shore and South Shore, where there's only a sidewalk on one side, people are kind of accustomed to going into the street there. And so people are more likely to do that even more now. But I mean, I definitely think we can reevaluate and decide that we want to repurpose and do things in other places. I don't think that's off the table.
Okay, thanks. Can I ask one more question? Having to do with the projects that we had to walk back because folks weren't really liking it. I think we've heard that sort of nationally, that a lot of people jumped right into thinking that, this is what every neighborhood needed. And we're hearing that, we weren't right about that assumption in a lot of cases. So maybe it is outside the wheelhouse of this program, but I'm curious if you could just speak to what we learned that people actually do need that we didn't think about
sure.
rather than shared streets.
Sure. I think, the shared street concept, as you said, in talking to other people who've launched these programs, it has not resonated in every neighborhood. And I think the only places I've heard of that it resonated well was where there was a project that's sort of already in the pipeline that was maybe not a shared street, but was going to change the streetscape already. And so they were like, oh yeah, sure, we'll do this in the interim, but we know this other thing is going to come next year or the year after. And so we're cool with that. I mean, from what I heard from people, they're really interested in, they're concerned about speeding more than having space for social distancing. And so they were, although we can do, obviously some temporary traffic calming, seem to resonate more with them in the conversations that I've had so far, that they just wanted to get something in that's permanent. I don't know if that's because there was a distrust that the permanent would ever come, and this might come for a month or 2 months and then they would never have it again. But traffic calming was when I would ask them, okay, what do you see as an issue? They would talk about concerns over speeding, not having space to social distance when they were walking. They felt like we were providing this just for people coming through their neighborhood who wanted this, but not people who really lived there. And I mean, one person said people just don't feel comfortable going out that much, that there's such a huge demand that they can't spread out, and that they felt like we were just trying to make their lives more difficult in just trying to get through this pandemic. So I think, you know, trying to get more of the permanent traffic calming projects was what I took away, and have been adding ones that they bring to me on Tom's list. And then just trying to get other ped and bike enhancements that they would like on a more permanent basis onto our list for review and potential funding in the future.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think it's still a great opportunity to sort of experiment with things and get better at the process of figuring out what people need and where. Thanks.
Grant?
Thanks. Yeah, I had kind of similar thoughts, and just really very supportive of, you know, what we've been doing. I think the whole point of doing things like this is that some work well, some of them maybe don't. And so it should, like, I think we should all be completely satisfied that there are some locations where we say, okay, guess that wasn't a great fit. You know, I just am really interested in making sure that this becomes you know, or continues to be an ongoing program, and that it's, you know, I think the COVID and our response to it was maybe the impetus to do some of these things. But I think, you know, and we'll probably talk about this more with the traffic calming subcommittee, but to me, all of these things are connected. And so having a program like this where we are trying things out, and, you know, it's sort of, I don't think it matters so much if it's, you know, shared street and we're trying to get pedestrians walking in the street versus just reducing the number of cars that are there or slowing them down. Like, I think that all these things are kind of together. And so I'd love to see this be basically a permanent, you know, ongoing kind of program where we are, I think we're looking for places where we might want to do something permanent at some point, and we're coming in and doing, you know, trying these temporary measures with the idea that maybe we could permanently change some of these streets, you know, at some point. So I think that's kind of the direction that I hear. You know, we're sort of thinking about it already. And so maybe even just thinking about the name of the program and how we kind of brand it and how we explain it to people to sort of reinforce that this is sort of, that this is a way that we can explore some traffic calming, you know, opportunities, and just sort of giving more space back to people outside of cars. One specific, well, two specific things. One, the Monroe Street one, I think is great. I'm really happy to see that one. I mean, that's a huge gap. So I'll be really excited to see how that works. And then the Atwood one up in my district, it's been great. You know, I'll be sad to see it go in the wintertime, but wanted to advocate to get it back as soon as the snow is gone in the spring, and that hopefully we could do it also with, you know, maybe we can get some skinnier delineators or some other, you know, material rather than the barrels, because that's, I think I have seen a fair number of people still using the sidewalk, you know, kind of a surprising number. And I think part of it is just because the barrels have kind of slid in a little bit, and it's just a little bit of a cramped space for a two-way facility. And I think, and it just doesn't quite feel, it feels like construction barrels. So I think perhaps there's a way we could, you know, do a round two of that in the spring that would get even more people to feel comfortable using it. And I think it's such an important route through there, you know, until we get it reconstructed.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know that we have been looking at, you know, different equipment sort of things that you can use that would be a better fit, because it is true, the barrels are large, and so they do skinny it up, but it is still I think works good.
Yeah, no, it's great, and it's been a huge improvement, I think, for that area.
Is that all you had, Grant? Okay, Yang, go ahead.
Yeah, I think great suggestion. You know, trying different kind of equipment, and maybe, you know, make this program more like a permanent kind of trial program. Yeah, we are working actually on it right now to kind of get some kind of smaller but still sturdy equipment. So take a lot less footprint. So we're going to try out some of those hopefully soon. And as really mentioned, we one of the biggest constraints for us this year to do more streets is the number of devices that we have. This year happened to be a really bad year. We have to respond to all kinds of emergencies, and we reserve devices for that. We actually have a much longer list than what's showing here. That we would not be able to do all of them, but I think the few Renee scheduled to the commission are the ones that we feel like the most critical ones. But hopefully we can get more devices, and we can have a stronger program.
Thank you, Yang. Any other comments? Harold?
Yeah, so thanks for presenting all this. And I mean, I'm fully in favor of making this into something that's going to continue and maybe become into a larger program. I would just encourage us to think about, I mean, as Grant said, like, what's the branding? And also maybe, yeah, what is the purpose of this? Because this has really shifted from early on, where it was about being able to keep 6 feet away from other people, which now is not as much of a concern anymore. So is the goal to create spaces that are only for people walking or biking? Is our goal to calm traffic? And I don't have a good answer for that, and I think we can figure that out. But I mean, if you want to create a successful program, you have to have an understanding of what your goal is, I think. So let's maybe spend, and I'm not sure what the best forum for that would be. Maybe the traffic calming subcommittee could think about that to some extent. But yeah, let's keep that on our radar. Thank you.
Hey, anybody have any other comments? I would just say I walk a lot in my neighborhood, and Renee, your comment about speed, as people are riding on the sidewalk when they're not supposed to be riding on the sidewalk, and my dog and I are trying to walk down the sidewalk, and we try and stay 6 feet away from people to maintain that social distancing. You end up out in the street, and if people are speeding on the street, it's an issue that becomes, exacerbated in this situation as well. So a lot of great comments, and thanks for sharing that update. Any other comments from people? Okay, thanks very much, Renee. Okay, update on traffic calming subcommittee. I'll just say that wanted to thank Grant because he prepared a working document which included a list of questions and talking points related to traffic calming and ped bike improvement enhancement projects, and it provided an excellent starting point for our work plan. And we did some brainstorming off of that and spent the whole last meeting brainstorming other questions and ideas to add to that working document. And we're going to continue on with that as well at the next meeting. So Bridget, Harold, Grant, and Bill are also on that subcommittee. Any other additional thoughts at this point? So more to follow. We'll keep you posted on that. Announcements by the chair, future meetings. We did receive approval for IT resources for our next TC meeting on August 26th. I had requested approval of IT resources for all of our TC meetings scheduled for the balance of 2020. I did speak with Lila DaCosta today, and she's working on getting those meeting dates set aside. There is a conflict with our September 16th date in that they have more type 1 meetings potentially scheduled for that date, but she's trying to work with some other groups so that we can have that date for the Transportation Commission. So more to follow for that. She understands that we need to plan ahead. If we're going to have a public hearing, we can't schedule a public hearing unless we know we're going to have a meeting date. So we had a great conversation today, and she understands, and she's working really hard to get that in place for us. So and we did have a really great conversation in that she's not, the mayor's office isn't approving whether we can have a meeting or not. They just needed a central point for coordinating IT resources. And that's what's happening now through the mayor's office. And they're working with the various groups to make sure that there are resources available for the type 1 meetings. And that's why they've carved out the type 2 meetings, like our subcommittee meetings and other meetings, so that more people can be meeting on a regular basis. So again, had a great discussion, and we're moving forward in that regard. So I will keep you posted on, I'm keeping them, they're all on our calendars. That's my hope, is that we'll have all of those dates moving forward. So in terms of members, we do have 3 vacancies. Once Jessica's term expires at the end of September, Bill, your term was introduced for reappointment at the August 4th Common Council meeting for final approval. It was introduced on the 4th and for approval on the 1st of September. And I know that they have some prospects that they're working on, and the mayor's office is keenly aware of the need for diversity on the commission, and in particular that we're looking for someone with expertise on transportation issues for people with disabilities. So if any of you, I passed one name along that I had heard from people. Anybody, if you have any names, please pass them either to Patrick or Yang or myself, or directly to Lila DaCosta in the mayor's office. And we sure appreciate any networking that you can do. I connected with Tom Wilson with regard to a joint TC-TPPB meeting. I had put together a draft agenda that I'd been working on last time we had it scheduled, when before it got canceled. And we're in agreement on that. So next up, we'll be sending an email out and then asking Patrick and Ann to get a meeting together for an agenda setting meeting, and to poll members to find an acceptable date. So, we have a few topics that definitely could use joint discussion. And so we'll look for a date for that as well. And again, that'll be a type 1 meeting. So whether we can use one of our TC dates for that will depend on our schedule, or potentially a TPPB date, or if we need to find another date. So those are all the things that I had promised I would work on that I've updated you on. With regard to agenda items for the August 26th meeting, that was saved in Legistar, I've added the Lake Street ramp RFP to that list for August 26th as well. So we'll balance everything to see if we can keep it at a respectable time frame, and try and balance our meetings going forward. Does anybody have any additional agenda items or comments on the agenda items that are on there? I do have the draft TC ordinance on there, Grant. I don't know if that's going to be ready for August 26th, or if we're pushing more likely September.
Yeah, there's some work to do on that yet, so probably not at the next.
Okay, so probably September would be, I'll move that down to September. Okay. All right. Any other comments or additional items that aren't on the agenda that you'd like to see added? If you think of any in the meantime, just shoot Patrick an email or shoot me an email. Okay, that concludes. Did we get, 3 hours? Yay, not 4.5 hours. So we can have if we can have a motion to adjourn in the next minute, we'll be done in less than 3 hours. So, Harold, is that a motion? Excellent. Bill, that's a second.
That's a second.
All right. Any discussion? Okay. I'm assuming unanimous consent. Great meeting. Really good discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week.
You too.